Good day. I'm Deb Goggins, scientific writer in the Department of Research Support at A.T. Still University. Today's presentation will teach you how to do a literature review for your research study. The goal of this module is to perform a focused literature review of recent studies to develop your research study protocol. Specifically, you will be required to identify 10 key articles published between 2015 and 2020. After completing the literature review and developing your research study protocol, you will be required to write a summary literature review. The best way to start your literature review is to use your PICO question. So let's use the PICO question from the PICO framework module as an example. First, identify the most obvious search terms from the PICO question. For instance, you can use your population or intervention as search terms. You can also use alternative wording for your population or intervention. Or you can search different combinations of the PICO framework items, such as combining the population and intervention as a single search term. For that example, you would search something like diabetes in adults. You should also consider additional search terms that can be used based on your PICO question. There are lots of examples that you could try. If you can't decide which terms you should use, you can discuss possible search terms with your faculty mentor. Once you have a list of possible search terms for your literature review, you need to actually search the literature databases. It is very important that you record all iterations of search terms used for individual searches so you document what you did and you don't repeat searches. A good tip when performing searches is to use Boolean operators to make your search more focused. If you are struggling with this step, you might consider contacting a librarian from the ATSU library to help you get started. You can also discuss your search strategy with your faculty mentor. Your mentor can help you choose the most likely search terms that will result in a successful search of articles that apply to your study. Once you have your search results, how do you reduce the number of studies to 10? First, omit all repeated studies. Different search iterations usually identify the same studies. Get rid of those so you can focus on evaluating the rest of the list. Next, read the abstracts of the remaining articles to determine whether they are relevant for your study. Reading the abstracts can further reduce the number of studies because you can omit studies that don't apply. At this point, as you sort through the research results, you might consider starting to rank abstracts in order of relevance to your study. If the abstract suggests that the study is relevant, obtain the full text of the article and critically evaluate its content. Ask yourself if the study is applicable and has a research protocol that you should consider for your study. Another tip when conducting a literature review is to look at the reference list of reviewed articles. Sometimes you can find more relevant articles that way. However, keep in mind your time range. In most cases, you cannot include articles published before 2015. So how do you critically evaluate the content of an article? First, consider the methods section. As you read through that section of the article, think about the study question and study population. Make note of the intervention and outcome measures and how the researchers collected data. At this stage, it would be a good idea to create a spreadsheet or other tracking document so you can collect all pertinent information for each reviewed article in one place. You might consider grouping articles with similar methods together so you can more easily compare and contrast the content. If you are having problems evaluating the methods section of the articles, speak with your faculty mentor. Your mentor can provide suggestions for evaluating the methods and determining which study protocols can be applied to your study. Next, Evaluate the results of each article. What were the actual results and the limitations? The limitations of a study are very important to consider because they can suggest problems with the study protocol and highlight issues that you may need to consider for your study. When critically evaluating a study, you should always think about how the content can be applied to your study. There are many ways to critically review the articles from your search results, and the examples provided here are just meant to help you start. Again, if you are having problems evaluating the content of your articles, speak with your faculty mentor. So you've finally reduced your search results to 10 articles and have critically reviewed each of the articles. What next? That next step is considering the content of the articles collectively so you can apply what you learned to your study. Considering the content collectively deepens your knowledge base of the topic area and helps you create a cohesive focus for your study. So think about the commonalities and differences of the study. Are there any gaps that the articles fail to address? And what can you do in your study to address those gaps? Again, these examples are meant to start you thinking about how to critically evaluate your articles. This focused and in-depth review of the content will make your study stronger. After you have critically reviewed your 10 literature review articles, individually and collectively, you need to decide how this information can be applied to your research study. I bet you started your literature review with a vague idea of what your study would involve. Has that idea changed after your critical review of the articles? Did they support your original ideas or suggest a different approach for completing your study? These are things to consider as you apply your evaluation to your study. At this point in the process, you should have a pretty good idea of what you need to do to complete your study. Another point to consider as you apply your evaluation to your study is whether the reviewed studies have conflicts of interest that you need to be aware of and that you may need to address as you design your study protocol. Think about the strengths and weaknesses of the reviewed studies. Learn from those studies so that you don't make the same mistakes. Use the information about strengths, weaknesses, and limitations to make your study stronger and better. If you are having a hard time figuring out how to apply the content of the reviewed articles to your study, talk to your faculty mentor. Your mentor may be able to help you focus on the information that is necessary to complete your study. At this point, you should have a basic idea of how to design your study protocol based on the information from your literature review. As you start to develop that protocol, think about those other studies. Make sure you use protocols and methods that worked and that will work for your study to answer your PICO question. Once you have a draft of your protocol, play devil's advocate. Things will never go according to plan. That's just science. So consider potential problems that could arise during data collection and try to create a protocol that is flexible enough to address potential problems. Think about the feasibility of your protocol so you can complete the study by the deadline. Once you have a protocol, discuss it with your faculty mentor to make sure you have considered all aspects of data collection. As part of the requirement for your D3 research project, you have to write a summary literature review. I have left this requirement for the end of the module because the main focus of the literature review should be to help you develop your study protocol. So what are the parts of the written literature review? First, you need an introduction. It should state your PICO question and specify the clinical application of your research study. The main body of the literature review should detail what each of the 10 reviewed studies was about. Make sure this summary is your critical interpretation of the article and that you specify how the article applies to your research project. The summary of each article should be about half a page. Finally, you end the written literature review with a conclusion that states what you learned and how it will inform your protocol development and your study overall. So what are some tips for the specific content that could be included in the body of the written literature review? Well, first, briefly describe the purpose of the study, how it was conducted, and what the authors found. Detail the study's strengths and weaknesses. Your description should not be data-driven. Make sure you are citing your sources correctly and you don't copy the abstract. The summary literature review is meant to be your interpretation of these studies. Finally, explain how the study contributes to understanding of the problem and how it can be applied to your study. Once you have a draft of your summary literature review, make sure to edit it. Editing a document is an important step in the process. So what are some things to consider as you edit? First, check that you have a cohesive focus throughout the document. Does the document say what you want it to say? If it doesn't, figure out how to reword the content so it does say what you want it to. Finally, check your grammar and mechanics usage. Poor writing makes it difficult for readers to understand your meaning. One final tip for completing the literature review for your research project involves using the resources available to you. For instance, the ATSU library has a page specifically designed to facilitate completion of your research project. Use it. The URL of that page is provided here. This concludes the literature review module developed by the Department of Research Support for A.T. Still University's Missouri School of Dentistry and Oral Health. Have a nice day.